Hey, welcome back to True-Moto-Resto, and in this episode 6 of the ZX7 restoration, we're finally going to get to paint the bodywork. Alright, so here are the lugs that I manufactured from the plastics. They've now been mounted onto the fairings, the side fairings. Now, what I find is that just the, I could probably bond those quite easily. I shouldn't say easily. I could bond them with plastics as well, because it would be very compatible both with the ABS as well as itself. However, I find that using epoxy to attach these works a little easier because they just stay in place better, because the plastics is very liquefied and you can't they kind of fall over under their own weight too much. Whereas if I use this epoxy, it'll actually support the lug until it dries. So I've done that a couple of times, and so far it's worked okay. So that's what I've done again here. So those two are now repaired. I'll let those dry and they should be good to go. So the good news is, we'll see if we can get a shot in here. The Metal Rescue has, there we go, it's cleaned off that gray-black residue that the steaming caused. And so I think the only thing left for me to do now is I'd like to try to clean some of the rust off the inside of this filler neck as well. So okay, on the front wheel, which was laid pretty thick with base clear paint, I've elected to use a chemical stripper to get it off. It was, especially on the spokes and the hub, it's like just super thick laid on here. So the other side is now all stripped. It's coming pretty clean. Now we're working on, see here, got a bit of cleaning still, a little bit of cleaning still to do on it, but it's getting there on that side. This side has got quite a bit still to go. So okay, so we're onto the gas tank bodywork now. So there was a tiny blemish left here. You may recall there's another video out there on my site where I used a really cheap paintless dent removal puller, and I managed to get the worst of this out, but there was still a slight imperfection there, so I've removed the paint from that and that'll get filled. Similarly on this side, this was a pretty bad crease, but I got, I'd say 90% of it out with that dent puller, and so I've removed the paint from there, and there'll be some very slight skim coat of filler that'll go on there. And here, something had almost punctured the tank here. It's kind of a little piercing, and there's quite an area that's kind of dimpled back. So I'm pulling the paint off of here as well. I'm still in the process of doing that. Chemically strip the paint, and then I'll sand it, and I'm going to get something into that hole just to clean it out. And I think I'm going to put some solder in there before I put the filler in there. It's not deep, but it's just kind of a gradual bend in from about just past the center of the tank to the edge here. Very gradual. So this area, I guess there'll be some filler, a very thin coat of filler for about this wide on here by the time it's done. I'm probably somewhere in there. All right, so I'm going to repair this little ding here, just the part that's really indented where something sharp hit it. I'm going to see if I can use my little Dremel butane torch to heat it. I could probably use the soldering iron again, the big one, but I want to give this a try just to see if it works. It may not, we'll see. Well, it probably would have worked if my torch hadn't run out of gas. Well, let's fill that up and try again. Right. There we go. That's worked. That's better. not working that well. That's better. This must have just melted all the flux off there. Not quite as easy as I thought it might be, but the little pin, the little punch mark in there is gone, so I'll be able to clean that up now and then use a regular filler on there. So there's the two little dings there in the front that I've got the solder in. So now I can start to mix some body filler. So this is the filler that I typically use on the bodywork. Evercoat Spotlight. It says premium lightweight polyester finishing and spot putty. Sands pretty well. It is quite light and easy to use. The problem is, this got like half a can of this left, or a third of a can. I just bought another can last week, and it was $78 Canadian for one of these. Okay, so on the sanding of the bodywork, I'm going to keep this particular portion brief because I can't even pretend that sanding is interesting to watch. It never will be. It's awful. But I'll just tell you what I use and why I use it. So I don't go any coarser than 180 just because I find for most of the time that you're using on, especially on the plastic, I've never found I need to go any coarser than that. And then if I do, then you spend a whole whack of time trying to get the scratch marks out. So I start 180, then I'll probably go to 220, 320, 400, and then it's usually a 400 by the time I've sort of wet sanded 400 on the primer. And then that's basically where I paint. And then I usually do like a 600 and 800 wet on the tank after it's clear coated before I put the second coat of clear on it over top of the decals. So that's the sanding process. So 180, and then the filler in those areas. So I make sure I've sanded behind where the filler is going to be, even if it's bare metal. Same with the plastic. All the areas where I put the filler, like down here, I sanded with 180 before I put that on. So yeah, 180, 220, 320, 400, and then I start to put the primer on. Okay, second coat of body filler. It was really close on the first layer, but it was just a little bit low in the center, so we'll give it one more go and see how it is then. And then there's just a couple of light marks in there. I had to put a second coat on that as well. So everything else has got one coat, and probably will only need one coat. That's all done from the filling perspective. So once that's done, once I've got this sanded off, then I'll set about sanding, basically wet sanding everything, and then it can get some primer on it. So while I'm not going to go through the whole sanding process with you, what I will show or will say is that, you've probably heard this 1,000 times, the prep is the key to a decent paint job. And one of the things that I find is, and you can kind of see it here, so this panel, this side panel, it's kind of a lower fairing here, has been painted before, and the paint actually lifted off right here in the corners. And that's because a lot of times when the panel's being prepped, people don't get into the corners enough with the sanding, so these end up staying shiny and glossy, and then the new paint doesn't stick to it, and then it ends up splintering off and cracking. So anywhere where you see anything that's shiny, you can't paint it yet. Like even these little spots here where, you know, the clear coat tends to run to the edge of the panel and you get a bit of a ridge, you got to take it all off until there's nothing shiny left at all anywhere on the panel. So you can't have any of this shiny stuff at the edge of the panel. You can't have this shiny line at the edge of the panel. You got to get rid of everything. Otherwise, you can have problems with paint sticking. It's always at the edges. in the corners. See that? So when you do the first pass with the sanding, you're always going to be left with this shiny stuff, and that's where you got to go back, take your time, and get it sorted out. Like it happens on every single panel, almost every edge and every corner. So you got to take your time and fix it up properly. Here's a few other things to look for. So if I pan out a bit here on this, so there's areas of this that are starting to come to the level of flat sanding that I want, but then you see areas like this here where you can still see it kind of looks a bit like orange peel, where the clear coat is really not yet sanded completely flat. So you want to make sure that all that stuff is gone. So it's got to look more like this, and you don't want to have any of this sort of shiny stuff left. As I said, that's all got to go. The other thing to look out for is any hard lines in where you have paint transitioning. So like here, the line kind of softens, right, where it's kind of sanded through to the primer. Back here, the line is still a very hard, crisp line, and that just means likely when you put the next coat of paint on there, you're actually going to see that line come through the paint. So, and you can also, if you're in doubt, just run your finger over it and just feel it, like that right there, because you can see it's still shiny there. You can feel that for sure. That's going to show up once the next coat of paint goes on. So trusting your fingers, not your eyes, or not just your eyes, is a good way to just feel where there are imperfections in the finish, and that'll kind of take you where you need to go to do more work. See right over here, like the lines are getting softer. There's no straight, crisp lines left anymore. You don't want, see how this is feathered? There's no crisp straight lines. That'll generally mean that you're getting a much smoother transition from one layer of paint to another. You don't want any of these hard lines left. And also when you're doing bikes, you got to pay a lot of attention to getting inside. It's a pain in the backside, but you got to get in here and into all these grommet and screw recesses. There's still some shiny stuff here, but so when you sand it, then you clean it all off and you look for your shiny stuff and you feel it all over, and then you go back and you sand it again. Okay, yet another example. You see right here, the paint, I guess, has just bubbled right off there. It just never properly adhered to what was underneath, and I can see quite clearly that the paint underneath there is not even been sanded. It's still shiny. So that's what you get. Okay, so here's something that if I could have a problem with anything when I do body work, this is the problem that I end up having. And I'm sure a lot of it's to do with the primer that I use, because it's basically a rattle can primer. This is trim and bumper primer, and I use it on plastics because it's flexible. But you can see here there's a wrinkling, and what that is that's kind of where I sanded through several layers of paint. So this panel had been repainted, so I've sanded through the repaint down to the factory finish underneath, and probably to the primer underneath there, and some layer or another is not compatible with the primer that I'm using, so then it starts to wrinkle, and this is the bane of my existence when I start doing body work, because it's hard to remember a time where this hasn't been a problem. And it doesn't seem to matter whether I use a primer filler or whether I use a trim and bumper primer or what I use. But all right, so there's the same spot after I've wet sanded it back and taken all the primer out of there. So I'm going to sand that a little bit more, wet sand it, and then I'll hit it with some primer again and see if my luck changes. So one of these layers in here is reacting with the primer. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just gently warming this area and then just very, very lightly dusting the primer on a very, very thin layer at a time, making sure that it dries beforehand, and I'm hoping that's going to help stop the bubbling. This is what I've done before, and it seems to work. I think the idea behind it is that it just prevents too much of the solvents from dissolving the old paint layers or reacting with it. You get it to evaporate off fast enough, and it seems to work okay. Okay, so I ended up scraping out any of that paint that was reacting with the primer, and I put a real thin skim coat of glazing filler on there, sanded it back, and now we're looking okay. Put a couple of 3 coats of high build primer on there. Once that dries properly, I will go back to I'll sand it again and put the trim and bumper primer on. Okay, so one thing I was trying to figure out how I was going to use these templates that I made, so that when I place them on at the paint shop, I could use these to mask. Because what I don't want to have to do is I don't want to have to tape this down, because, you know, of course, then if I tape it down, it's no longer going to line up with, because the tape is going to go over the mark that I'm actually trying to mask in the first place. So what I came up with was I bought a bunch of these little magnets off Amazon. So the idea being that I can just plunk those guys on. So once I get the white painted on the tank first, I can just basically pop a bunch of these little magnets right on here. Now, so I can put as many of those on as I need, and that's not going anywhere. So that allows me now, so if you assume that I've painted this whole tank white to start with, so now the next stage, what I want to do is to paint the blue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put on the template for the color that I want to paint, and then I'll mask around the edge of this, and then all the way down is going to get completely paper masked off, and then just be a thin line tape around here all the way around. And then when everything is masked off, all I have to do is to pop these guys off, lift my template off, and the only thing that will be exposed is the white paint that is now going to be painted blue. And I'll do exactly the same thing for the green. Okay, just a bit of information here on some of the tape I'm going to be using. So I bought 2 different kinds of thin line tape. This is this one is a 1/4 inch. And then this one is, I think, 1/8 inch. Yes, 1/8 inch. So this is really thin. So probably I'm going to end up using this stuff to do the right around the edge of these paint lines where I have to mask. Same with along here. I'll use a thin line tape because it's just easier to get the contour and the shape that you want. And then once you get this on, then you can use a wider piece of tape such as this to lay down the heavier mask, and then kind of paper masking material in the middle. So that's the plan. So in a couple hours, I'm going to head over to my buddy's paint shop with all of this stuff, and today I'm going to get everything set up and mounted. Then it'll stay in his paint booth from this afternoon to overnight. Everything will be nice and warm in there. We'll get everything attached to the painting table that we'll set up, and then tomorrow morning I will arrive bright and early with my paint, which is all in here. I'll give you a shot at what this stuff actually is. So this is the Mazda Crystal White. So on top of this, so basically this is a tri-coat, so it's white first, then the over top of the white you put the pearl, and then obviously at the end of everything the clear coat goes on. So that everything that needs to have white on it, the whole panel will be painted with the white, the whole panel will they'll be painted with the pearl, and then over top of that we'll start masking, and we'll do blue and we'll do green, and then once all that's done then we'll clear it all. This one is the color matched with the optical scanner to a color called Atlas Blue. And you can see the codes. I'm not sure which manufacturer it is, but that's what it came out to, Atlas Blue. The other one, the white, matched to a Mazda. And then this is the green. This is a Chrysler Green Angels Road Assist. It looks like it must be color used by some sort of like a roadside assist company, because I know that the Chrysler, there's a Chrysler industrial blue that actually matches perfectly to the Yamaha RZ350 color as well. I think it's even maybe a New Holland blue for the tractors, matches to the Yamaha YZ350 blue as well. But yeah, so these are what the colors are, if that helps anybody. See the color codes. And I bought 1 pint of the white because only the 2 side panels and the tank have to be painted white. That's it. I bought 1 pint of the blue because the only things that are going to be blue is the top of the tank, that V stiffener right here, and then the bottom half of the lower fairings. And then I bought 2 pints of a quart of green because that's going to have to be, everything's going to have to get colored in green in some way, shape, or form. So all of this stuff is going to be green. Of course, the wheels are going to be green. The bottom of the tank will be green. And then you've got these sections of the side panels at each end green, and the top of the lower fairings will be green. So definitely need that quart for sure. And the plan for that is I've made a couple of stands. So basically I've got like 2 2x4s that are sticking up with a V-notch in the top. They're going to get screwed to a hunk of plywood, so they'll sit on the ground, and I'm going to take, this is an old curtain rod which kind of comes apart. So I'll put one of these in the front wheel and one in the rear wheel, and they can sit across just a stand, and that way it's easier to kind of rotate the wheel as you paint it. So I'll get that set up today as well. And then tomorrow is the exciting day. All right, we're all set up in the paint booth for tomorrow. Now these are not all going to stay in here all the time, because we're going to do one color at a time. So the first round will be the tank and the 2 side panels, and then everything else is going to have to come out. And then we'll bring in blue stuff, and this will come back in for the blue. The tank will stay in for the blue, and then obviously this will stay in for the blue, and then everything will stay here for the green except the little piece, and everything has to come back in to be clear coated. So setting this stuff up is a bit of a trick. I've got my stands for the wheels. So it's 2:30 p.m. Still got to put the green on. That's going on next. I have to come back and I've got to do a slight fix here because the tape wasn't quite down tight enough and we got a bit of blow by on a couple of spots there on the edge. So we've got to come back and remask that, dust in the white to fix it. All right, all the colors are on. I do have to come back. We have to dust in right here because I forgot to mask off the opening there. We got some blow through from the other side. And then the tape lifted on me here. So I'm gonna dust that in. And also right there, the tape lifted. So we have to mask this off here. Just dust that in with a little airbrush. And I should be good to go. The tank and everything came out nice. It's like after 5 o'clock now. I've been here since 8:30. Definitely an all-day job. Okay, first coat of clear is on. So far it's looking all right. Not bad for a rookie so far. Here we are, so basically 11 hours later. Turned out pretty well. There's a few trials and tribulations along the way, doing 3 colors, but at the end of the day, I'm quite happy with that. And what this is, my 5th paint job maybe? Not too bad. Okay, we're back at the shop. I just brought all the bodywork and the wheels back. So it's all here. Everything looks pretty darn good. Quite happy with how everything looks. Not bad for a rookie painter, I think. So what'll happen now is I'm gonna wait at least a week for the paint to fully cure. And then the tank will get wet sanded with probably 800 wet. And then I'll potentially apply those decals. And then it can go back and I'll give it another coat or 2 of clear on top of the decals. Similarly with the wheels, I want to make sure that I've got at least another week of cure time in the paint before I have the new tires mounted on there. I don't want the paint kind of pulling and tearing and whatnot, so I'll wait a week at least for that. And then we have to move on to a few other tasks, I think. So what do I still have to do here? Well, I've got to rebuild the forks. So that's probably going to be a task that has to happen pretty soon. The forks, the steering bearings have to be changed. So in the triple clamp, the bearings on that have to be pressed on. And then I have to put new races into the frame. So that all has to happen still. What else have I got to do? The brakes have got to be disassembled, cleaned, ready for going back on the bike. So yeah, that's those are I think the main things. Obviously a lot of stuff's got to be cleaned before it goes back on as usual, but those I think are the main, I'll call them maintenance and repair type of activities that I have to do. So we'll have to get to those next. So thanks for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, and subscribe. And we'll see you in another week with the next episode. Thank you.